That is Kerry Stead, aka Melbourne Games Coach, coming to you from the 2013 Australian Open Chess Championships from North Leagues Club in Sydney. This is going to be a quick look at some of the games from round 2. As usual, once again we'd like to thank the sponsors: Hancock Prospecting, North Leagues, Ridges North Sydney, Australian Chess Enterprises and Chess Discount Sales. Turning to the games of round 2, we're going to start with this clash, which was the top board game between Ganesh Vishwanath of Western Australia and Grandmaster Igor Kenkin, the top seed from Germany. Out of the opening, Ganesh has managed to hold off Kenkin reasonably well, and he's reached this position after 23 moves. Kenkin's centre is obviously solid, but not really threatening, and Vishwanath does have the potentially dangerous H-pawn, which could be really difficult to stop later on in the game. In this position, it seems, at first sight at least, very tough for Kenkin to make progress if Vishwanath just essentially sits on the position and really does nothing. However, unfortunately for Ganesh, he decided to try and make some progress in the centre, and this was really his undoing in the position. Game continued: knight b6, knight d2, king e7, bishop c2, and Kenkin swings the rook from the c file over to the g file. f3 was then played and king went back to f8, and this is where Vishwanath opened up the position somewhat, which really turned out to be his downfall. He played the pawn to e5, which on the surface looks like a very good pawn break. However, this really does activate the bishop on b7 for Kenkin, and combined with the rook on the g file and the queen that comes into the game a little bit later, creates a number of problems that Ganesh was unable to solve. Here the bishop went back to e7, pawns were exchanged on f6, and the knight came to e4. Bishop went back to e7 to maintain the bishop pair, and the knight jumped into c5. Again, Kenkin retained the bishop pair with bishop d5, and Vishwanath brought the queen up to e5. Obviously, it again on the surface looks like a very good queen move, centralising the queen, but this allows the rook to come into g2 and provide quite a bit of trouble on the second rank. Bishop went back to c1. Queen continued down the h file to h3, and the bishop came to e4. Again, looking to trade bishops. Obviously there is a threat on the a2 pawn that could be captured, but rather than doing that, Kenkin decided to play knight c4. Queen went to b8 check, king up to g7, and Ganesh grabbed the b pawn. Again, looks very risky in this position, and it turns out to be not very good at all. Kenkin played bishop takes c5, and after d takes c5, bishop takes e4, trading off a number of the minor pieces, and then queen d3 check. After a little zigzag maneuver to regain the pawn, he played the very powerful pawn to a5, and here you can see the big difference between the position. After those exchanges of minor pieces in the central pawns, we have Kenkin with a powerful rook on the second rank. We've got a centralised queen and a very well placed knight. The knight dominates the bishop on c1, the rook on h1 stuck in the corner, and the queen on the b file is in a very precarious position at the best of times. Again, tactically continuing with pawn to a4, obviously the pawn can't be taken because of the check with the knight on d2. Ganesh tried rook to d1. Kenkin was happy to exchange queens and win the a pawn and leave that dangerous pawn on a2. King obviously has to go to the corner, and then a series of tactics here to create a very good position for Kenkin. Knight went to a5, obviously threatening a rather large fork on b3. Rook came to d3 to stop that. Again, now the rook pins the bishop with rook g1. The rook now goes to c3, and again exploiting the fact that it's trying to defend both c3 and b3 and c1. Kenken played knight b3 check. Here Ganesh could have gone into a rook ending by taking the knight, which allows Kenken to obviously take the bishop and then take the c-pawn, and you would imagine with the king cut off on the A and B files combined with the passed E and F pawns that Kenken probably should be able to win that position fairly comfortably. However, there is still a little bit of technique required to finish it off. However, in this position, Ganesh went astray and decided to take the pawn on A2, which simply allowed knight takes C1. This left Kenken a piece up, and very quickly Ganesh resigned the position here, seeing that obviously he's going to be pieced down against one of the best grandmasters in the world, and obviously the dangerous c-pawn is going to be very easily stopped by the rook, and the king can come across and help capture that. So Ganesh put up a very good fight, but unfortunately was not able to get anything more than the expected loss in this game against Igor Kenken. A couple of other games from the round which are interesting. The big upset from the tournament, this is a position from the game between George Lester and Tristan Boyd, the main upset of round number 2. In this position, George has, playing with the white piece, obviously has just played the d-rook to g1, and Tristan Boyd played the very nice move, pawn up to b5. Lester captured on b5, and Boyd followed up with h6, opening up lines on the queen side. Here Lester played h4, and this is where Boyd made the first of his mistakes here. He should have probably played pawn takes b5, and after h5 and b4, it's the attack from black that crashes through first, and black is very comfortable in this position, and without the open lines, the rooks on the G and H file really don't have time to get into the attack, and even if they do, in a number of lines the king can simply sit on the h8 square and be comfortable, even if it's behind a white pawn on h7, whereas the attack from black is coming from both the bishops. The rook can come in, the queen can come in, and it's really very difficult for white to stop the impending doom in this situation. However, after h4, Tristan was obviously a little bit worried about the pawn coming to h5 and decided to play h5 himself. The problem with that move obviously now is that the bishop on g6 is a little less stable, and the king obviously has somewhat less pawn protection. Knight took the pawn on e4, bishop took, knight took, and the queen took. So at the moment, black is actually a piece up for a couple of pawns, but you can see that the king is starting to look a bit vulnerable after bishop h6. Rook came to a7 to try and defend, and a very nice move, pawn to b6. Very sneaky move attacking the rook, and as we'll actually see, this b pawn turned out to be the deciding factor in the game at the end. The rook came to b7, and Lester saw a very nice opportunity to exchange and get a very good position. Took on g7, recaptured with the rook, threw in rook g1 check after king f7, queen h6, and here it looks like Lester's attack is really starting to make progress. You can have obviously rook g7 coming in and a number of threats, possibly even taking on d4, but as you can see from the arrows on the screen, there is a very nice defense for black. Black can actually play knight b4. Obviously, if white doesn't do anything and try, or even if he does try and do, say, the rook g7 idea, eventually he can actually escape from the checks, running away to c8. And obviously, even if the pawn check or the rook check, the king's going to be safe on the b8 square. And it's very tough for white to stop the dual threats. You've obviously got queen e1 threatened, as well as a smothered mate threatened after knight c2 and knight a3. So this position, this is where Tristan made his final mistake, and in this position he actually played king e7, and this actually leads to a very quick mate b7 being the key move. He then tried rook g8, obviously thinking that the rook can't leave the back rank because the back rank make threats with queen e1. However, queen g7 ultimately decides that the king has to go to the back rank, and the b pawn promotes. So that was the finish to the game between George Lester and Tristan Boyd, one of the upsets of the round. And to finish off, a miniature on the lower boards, a game that Michael Courtney would most definitely want to forget. This is a game between Anthony Pickering and Michael Courtney. It was very enterprising. A3 was the choice of opening from Pickering. D5, knight f3, bishop g4, c4, d4. It looks like a fairly relatively standard sort of English type position, or some sort of reversed Benoni sort of arrangement. Queen to b3, hitting the b7 pawn. Pawn comes to b6, and tactically things start to go downhill from here. Knight e5, obviously threatening the bishop on g4. The bishop retreated to c8, and the start of the problems, queen f3, obviously threatening mate on f7 as well as the rook on a8. Courtney tried f6 to defend. Queen takes the rook in the corner, pawn takes the knight, and recaptures on b8. So Pickering's a rook up, and you could almost resign here. But play continued. Knight f6, pawn to d3, knight to d7, attacking the queen. Queen takes a7, knight to c5, pawn up to b4. The apparent fork, knight b3, and the final nail in the coffin, queen a4 check, again forking king and the knight. So that was a very quick game to wrap up this summary of round 2. We still have a number of leaders tied for the lead on 2 out of 2, so it'll be interesting to see how play continues in the later rounds. Thanks for watching.